Well, before we get there, we wanted to talk a little bit about RFK, and we haven't done too much on him. I think whenever we've talked about him, we've tried to talk about his stuff outside of the vaccine thing, because I think that, like, at a certain point, that understanding, you're going to go in that conversation with whatever you think about that, right? And I'm not saying it's not important, but it's just sort of like, don't let some of these other things float under the radar, um, because
Well,
what.
sorry, I was just gonna say, like, I'm also sensitive to like the idea Gene, elaborated. Like, I don't think it's our. While I'm skeptical and I will not hold my tongue on these candidates, I also don't think every opportunity to pull them up on something they slip up on is useful. However, there's certain things you can't like entirely ignore.
No, I'm not saying to ignore it. I'm just saying that, like,
Right.
almost any time anyone writes or talks about them, like, that's all they talk about. And I think that means that you're not getting, like, the full spectrum, because there is this kind of argument that you've seen from people, on the left, maybe on the kind of outsides, maybe people who aren't necessarily part of, like, some of these big organizations, but people who care a lot about these things. Will give them that, right? Who say, like, yeah, I don't agree with him on this, but he's the only one who's willing to talk about this, and that. And the big one that people argue, is that this is somebody who's unafraid, to take on the American empire, right? And the best thing you can do as an American leftist or socialist right now is to take on the American war machine, right? Very sympathetic to the argument that, like, something that is incredibly beneficial to the world, right? If you can weaken the power of the American war machine. But when we were talking about it a couple of weeks back, we were talking about it in the context of Roger Waters. Roger Waters was praised, by RFK, and RFK shortly after deleted his tweet, praising Roger Waters, because he was informed of Roger Waters' position on Israel Palestine. And watching him fold so quickly on that, for me, completely evaporates any kind of argument that this guy is going to have the backbone, to take on, the military industrial complex, in general, for example. But if you don't believe me, or if you think that, maybe we don't understand that particular chapter, here's an opportunity with a fairly friendly audience, right? Um, um, of RFK talking about Israel Palestine on Glenn Greenwald's show, and we can just let people make their own mind up about this.
Everything has a historical context in Israel. And if you look at why we don't have a two-state solution in Israel, which everybody now says they want, but both in 1947 and 1947, 1948, and then again in 2001, it was the Palestinian leadership that walked away from a two-state solution and pledged itself to the destruction of the Jewish people. Oh, and that.
So before we go any further, like, let's catch that last thing that he said again. He said, pledge themselves um, to the, what was it, eradication? Let me get it. I'll play it again so people can get it exactly right.
Yeah.
People.
Lo siento.
Away from a two-state solution and pledged itself to the destruction of the Jewish people.
Destruction of the Jewish people. I mean, like, absolutely unhinged and wild thing to say about people who have seen in their lifetime, their homes, their lands be completely eradicated, being
They're
pushed
so
into.
consumed with hate, though, to agree to a two-state solution.
But let's be very clear here. Saying that the Palestinians have dedicated themselves to the destruction of the Jewish people is such a heinous and absurd thing to say, that, like, it's hard to take anything else that he says seriously after that. But let's let him continue.
Clear history, and I think at a time when they had a very, very generous solution on the table. Now, the other thing I say is Israel is a democracy, but it's a flawed democracy, just like the United States. But if I was a dissident Arab Palestinian, would I rather be a dissident in Israel or in Saudi Arabia or Oman or Qatar or any other Arab nation? If you're a dissident, you get up in the middle of the public square and denounce the government. Where would you rather be? You'd rather be in Israel. It's the only place you're.
Yeah, an IDF guy can shoot you in the head and they can act like they can't get to the bottom of what happened?
Yeah, so we're talking about Shireen Abu Akleh, who is a Palestinian and American journalist who was killed. Um, was shot by the IDF. And look, you don't even have to cherry pick. I mean, there are plenty of examples of people being
Right.
brutalized by the Israeli state for speaking out against the occupation. Israel has people who are brought into Israeli courts in the occupied areas have a completely different judicial system set up for them. One that has an astronomical conviction rate. I think something like 99%. Because one, because look, there's no justice there, and two, because people are held and detained for years, often for like very minor cases. So people will just plead guilty so that they can just serve out a sentence and then return, hopefully, to their homes and families that hopefully haven't been destroyed by another bombing done by Israel. So again, what the hell are you talking about here? Where would you rather be? We are seeing it happen before our eyes. What happens to people who are dissidents, right? And he's going to make this argument a second. Like, is the idea that people who support Palestine are somehow quiet about the Saudis? It's
Right.
absolutely ludicrous, especially when more and more in the region
Hmm.
silent buddies have been the government of Israel and the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? So this
Yep.
idea that these are like, I mean, like two, with disastrous consequences, right? So this idea that like here's some kind of beautiful beacon of democracy surrounded by these dangerous countries, like yeah, there's a lot of fucked up nations in the area, and Israel is one of them.
Yeah, like compared to one ally, this has a civil society you might find more pleasant. Is not really a ringing endorsement. Yeah, Jesus.
And we need to have the same standard for judging Israel as we judge
Oh
other
God.
Arab countries. We should, and Israel is going into the West Bank and killing children. Is never doing that deliberately. Never. And nobody has ever said it is.
Well, a lot of
All
people
of the
have a lot
other
of people
countries,
have said it. A lot of people have
this.
said it is. But let me just ask you because
Okay,
I just want to
I would
focus the
say this.
Wait, and like we'll go forward, but credit to Glenn for not letting that one slide. I mean, that's sometimes I like interviewing can be tough sometimes, right? Because you want to figure
Right.
out the right way to do it, particularly with like a candidate for office, right? Because you do just sort of want to let them say what they think, right? Um, so I can maybe get the inclination to not say anything. But good on Glenn there for saying, "What the hell are you talking about? I'm not going to let that one slide."
Yeah,
Um,
like the broader like context, like which of course, like if there weren't IDF soldiers taking pops at kids, which there are, like
yeah.
numerous occasions,
There there
high
there
profile.
are horrific videos of precision
Yeah.
headshots. Uh,
Exactly, but also, like, I would say even more of, like, the generic, the Seattle Times, papers show Israel counted calories to limit food in Gaza. Like, what effect does that have on kids?
yeah. No, I mean it's just there's no way that you can run a prolonged bombing campaign or run a prolonged occupation and say like, well, it's never our intention for anything to ever happen to these children, right? I mean, this is straight up propaganda in the pure sense.
Apologetics, yeah. Yep.
Apologetics.
All of those other countries, it is the deliberate policy of those countries to attack and target civilians
Okay,
and to kill them. Israel is a model democracy in the Mideast. It's the only democracy in the Mideast. And as a democracy, it's a model for peacekeeping. There's never been a time in history when a democracy has gone to war with another democracy. So I think our policy in the United States should be to support the growth of democracies around the world.
I mean, so there you have it. I mean, just last little fact check there. I mean, talking about Israel being a model democracy. I mean, tell that to Israelis, right? Even dropping this issue as Israel
Right.
continues to slide into far right authoritarianism, there have been massive protests and movements in civil society to challenge the extremely frightening degradation of democracy in that country for like Israeli citizens. Dropping for a second the apartheid system. I mean, look, at the end of the day, what you got there is pretty boiler like you're not going to get a hostile interview on Israel Palestine to like a Joe Biden, for example, right? So because RFK is like sort of in this different kind of media ecosystem, he gets put on, gets questioned on these things. I think that's good, right? Well, this is like a pretty typical level apologetics for Israel that you would get from a lot of Democratic Party politicians, is what I'm saying.
And I have to point out, this is to the right of John fucking Kerry, who said on his leaving the State Department, if the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both, or it won't really ever be at peace. Just simple statement of fact.
Yeah. So look, the point here is this, is that when it comes to RFK, these kind of ideas, these next level, that like, oh, maybe we disagree with him on this or we disagree with him on that, but this is somebody who's willing to take the sledgehammer to the status quo. You're watching somebody trip over themselves over like one of the defining factors in American politics when it comes to foreign policy, and that is criticizing an apartheid regime that is Israel.
Yep.
Unable to even like the thing that's so amazing about this RFK clip though, Matt, is, as I was saying before, like this isn't even just like a little bit of apologetics mixed with denial, of the more like milquetoast variety that you get from some maybe like progressive Democrats who are unwilling to really criticize
Right.
Israel, but like they'll put a little bit like, well, human rights should be respected, or this. I mean, this is straight up glowing. He's saying this is the only real democracy in the area. They have no intention of harming
It's a Bush
people.
era.
The Palestinians have committed themselves to the destruction of Jewish people, right? I mean, this is like rabid APEC level stuff. And look, I'm sorry, you see somebody fall over this, you cannot believe that this person is capable or particularly interested in doing the real work. Like rhetorically, he might say some things about not wanting to prolong war in like Ukraine, Russia, but you see somebody fall over themselves in a moment like this. What makes you think that if they were to be elected president, the very, very unlikely scenario that they beat Joe Biden in the Democratic Party nomination, that they would? I mean, this is somebody telling you who they are very clearly, because RFK is already labeled as a kind of outsider, already labeled as somebody who's like dangerous for the Democratic Party, right? So like the upside for him to say things like this is very limited, right? Because he could just include the same people will be mad at him if he were to say some truth, for example, about Israel Palestine, as they are who are mad about him for what he said about Russia Ukraine, for example. So this is somebody telling you what he really thinks, and I think that it's very telling.
Yeah, I mean, and particularly on the Waters thing is so chicken shit. Like, I mean, look, if you want him to run for your ideas campaign, sure, fine, whatever. Like, this is bad. That's a bad intervention to say, hey, I'm going to stand up for this guy. Oh, wait, he said, what about Israel? Never mind. It's like, come on, man. Like, he's not serving the purposes you want him to serve, even.
Yeah. Well, it's dark, and look, I these are weird times. I know people are trying to look for a champion, and it's hard sometimes when you see, for example, presidential elections where
Did you see I've seen rumblings that Cornell may be ditching for the Green Party.
So I have two, and I would categorize them as rumblings. I haven't seen anything
Okay.
definitive, but possibly, I mean, I could have just missed it. But yeah, I have heard that
More
there's
on that
some
maybe
kind of
next week.
exploration, and if we get more information, I'd be more happy to talk about it. But look, I mean, like beyond anything, I think that like if you are a socialist in 2023 and you're trying to figure out what to do, the things that you have to be doing is looking to class politics in this country and
Presidential
trying to
election.
build up some kind of institution versus look, like socialists and like people who are maybe are like on the left, who maybe consider themselves to be outside the mainstream, love to make this point, like I'm outside the mainstream, I'm not like a typical person. Then why are you doing the exact same thing as like almost every other American person, which is like hyper fixating on the horse race of a presidential election, right? Instead of like thinking structurally about how we build up this movement. It boggles my mind that people who consider themselves to be outside of tradition on these things are so adamant about trying to find some kind of sneaky way to say this represents my politics, when you have to just be able to recognize that as things are currently constituted, we don't have a socialist party that is putting up candidates for office, right? And in the socialist movement in this country is so diffuse that like we don't have any level of coordination to be able to operate even in the ways of like the Socialist Party under Eugene Debs, right? And if that's what you want to see, for example, is seeing like a great radical figure like a Eugene Debs rise again and getting, 15% in a presidential election and being able to be proud about who you're voting for, you should think about how Eugene Debs was in that position in the first place versus just thinking that Eugene Debs created a socialist movement out of whole cloth by running for president. No, this was somebody who was dedicated themselves to the labor struggle and the social struggle for decades. And like that's what's in front of us. And I know it's not the most fun thing in the world. I know that it would be better if all that we had in front of us was just creating the right argument and the right media strategy for a political candidate to take office. But that's just not how the world is. I'm sorry. It sucks. But like we have to deal with the conditions that are in front of us. And the number one goal, it's not sexy. It's not sexy. It's hard work. But the only thing that we should be really thinking about doing is how can we build up institutions that can reflect and direct working class frustration and desire for a better world right now, and attaching to whatever presidential candidate comes along in whatever cycle is just not how we're going to be able to develop that. Sorry, it's just not how it's going to work, friends.
Yeah, well said.
Well, folks, we're going to jump over the post game. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We'll be taking calls and questions. If you have anything that you wanted to add, you can leave us a voicemail at 1940-289-7234. Again, that's patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Get access to that bonus, to the post game, and also our awesome bonus episode, which Matt had a great title for, Capitalism in the Countryside, where we looked at the political economy of rural America. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great talking with Keith, yeah, look forward for more because he's on a beat that is very close to one David and I are fixated on.
I know, it was really a lot of fun. So if you haven't seen it
Yep.
too and you're a patron, definitely check it out as well. We'll be over in the post game about 10-15 minutes, folks. So come and see us there. I'll be back this Thursday talking about Cuba, so 3 Central. So come by and join us for that. And everyone else, take care.
Peace.